In about 10 minutes, I'm going to take you through the latest property data to help you conclude if you should buy a property or not at the moment. And the reason you should consider hearing me out here is because I'm William Gale, and I've spent since 2012 building a UK-wide home buying company, British Home Buyers, and a nationwide estate agency, British Home Sellers, that has dealt with over 13,000 transactions, totaling about £3.3 billion of property. So let's get into the facts. Right now, we've got a housing crisis. Those aren't my words, but the words of Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Levelling Up. And she has made crystal clear that she's going to solve this by a shake-up of the planning system to pave the way for 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years. She wants the country to get back to building 370,000 new homes a year. But how realistic is this? So when you look at this data that shows the number of new homes, new dwellings completed year by year from all the way back to the 70s, the graph doesn't even go up to 370,000 new homes. So I think we all know these targets, of course, are great, but ambitious. And yes, if we started building 370,000 new homes a year from today onwards, then that would, of course, help slow house price growth. But how long do we think it's realistically going to take us to get to building that level of 370,000 homes a year? Well, let's see what Angela Rayner thinks herself.
But things like Great British Energy or on housing, as you say, my area, you pull a lever and it's some years down the line because, you know, it has to go through planning, which is why I was eager to get the planning reforms through so that we can get more affordable homes built and we can get the houses that people desperately need, because we've got a homeless and housing crisis in the UK. But that won't happen overnight. So the New Towns proposal, which is why I've come out with it today, again, is the New Towns Task Force. It'll take them hopefully before a year, but up to 12 months for them to look at what sites are available. And then we have to go through the planning process to then get that up and running.
So look, I think all these plans are noble, important, and the right thing to do. But if we break down the facts here, we have a self-declared housing crisis, and Angela Rayner is clear that there is no instant solution to this. And that isn't a criticism of her. At least she's being honest about the process of getting this sorted. But it's to illustrate to you that as I take you through the key data that will determine the direction of travel on house prices, it is highly unlikely the supply of property is going to magically increase over the next couple of years that will be enough to counteract the pressures on house price growth. So what is happening with house price growth right now? Well, right now, we're already starting to see house prices pick up pace. All this before the more recent interest rate cut from the Bank of England the other week. And it's not just the average UK house prices that have been increasing, but even when you break it down by country, we are seeing universal increases across all 4 nations. But of course, like with everything, the devil's in the detail. And as we can see, clearly there are pockets of red where prices have still been dropping despite the average house prices across each country increasing. So this does bring up an interesting point that individual areas will require their own individual assessments on if prices are likely to keep increasing or decrease in the future. But if you look at this same data from back in November, it is clear how area by area has been switching from dropping in red to prices increasing in green. And I suspect when we look at this same data in another 6 months, almost every area in the UK will be green. But don't take my word for this. Let's keep looking at the data to reinforce this. These 4 graphs from Nationwide give you a good snapshot of key metrics to track. And the most striking thing to me is firstly that top left graph. The annual percentage change in UK house prices is back on the rise after the slump through last year. Remember, all this before the Bank of England interest rate dropped to 5% from 5.25%. And as a result, you were starting to see average UK house prices in that bottom left graph begin to rise back to that COVID peak we saw. But I think a really important thing to look at is that bottom right graph. You can see that despite UK house prices beginning to rise, the UK house price to earnings ratio hasn't really increased since dropping. And a big part of that is because average income has been growing faster than house prices. Yes, I fully appreciate that purple line shows how, despite a 7.3% increase in pay on average, it still equates to the average wage being 1.7% worse off, just because of how inflation has pushed up the prices of everything. However, when you relate wage growth specifically to that of house price growth, that 7.3% is far higher than house price growth we've been seeing. But of course, the thing you're probably thinking is that house prices may have flatlined, average wages have increased, but mortgage rates have gone through the roof. And of course, you'll be right. But what this demonstrates is firstly the tolerance in house prices despite interest rates being so high. And importantly, what do you expect is likely to happen as the Bank of England begins to gradually relax the Bank of England base rate?
It does have the effect of making all assets more valuable. I mean, interest rates are like gravity in valuations. I mean, if interest rates are nothing, values can be almost infinite. If interest rates are extremely high, that's a huge gravitational pull on values. And we had that in the early 1980s.
So the point Warren Buffett is making is that interest rates have an intrinsic link on asset prices. If interest rates come down, money is less expensive and asset prices go up, and vice versa. There's no getting around that this latest drop in interest rates is going to release more liquidity into the market that is going to increase asset prices of not just property, but pretty much every asset class. The question now becomes, do we think interest rates will keep dropping? Because if interest rates continue dropping, then that gravity pushing down house prices will ease and we'll slowly start to see house prices continuing to rise again. And right now, the financial markets are anticipating the bank rate to continue falling gradually over the coming 3 years. This table shows the swap rates in August compared to August last year, and you can see every single rate has fallen. And the reason swap rates are so important is because the swap rate is a rate based on what the market predicts interest rates will be in the future. It's a prediction. If swap rates rise, then mortgage lenders will look to increase their rates. If swap rates go down, mortgage rates tend to go down as well. My prediction might be wrong, but I think this time next year, we'll start to see 5-year fixed mortgages down to 3.5% again. So look, what could tangibly stop house prices continuing to rise? What could stop house prices rising? Well, one, interest rates going up could, which would almost certainly be triggered by inflation increasing again. Two, population collapse. Although we only had 400 more births than deaths last year, we saw the biggest annual population growth in 75 years. Why? Because net migration increased to over 685,000 people last year. That's net migration. Gross migration ran at about 1.2 million people last year. So to keep up with that pace of net migration, we would have to actually build over 520,000 new homes a year, when we've had about 660,000 new home completions over the last 4 years. Or three, an unexpected global event like a pandemic, global financial crash, or a world war, which I just want to remind you, all three of those things have happened over the last 100 years, some more than once. Or can the government solve this housing crisis? Let's hear Angela Rayner's plan to stop house price growth.
Whilst the previous government watered down housing targets, caving into their anti-growth backbenchers, this Labour government is taking the tough choice of putting people and country first. For the first time, we'll make local housing targets mandatory, requiring local authorities to use the same method to work out how many homes to build. But, Mr. Speaker, that alone is insufficient to meet our ambition. So we're also changing the standard method used to calculate housing need so it better reflects the urgency of supply for local areas. Rather than relying on outdated data, this new method will require local authorities to plan for homes proportionate to the size of existing communities. And it will incorporate an uplift where house prices are most out of step with local incomes. The collective total of these local targets will therefore rise from some 300,000 a year to just over 370,000 a year.
I really hope this happens because I think it will help, but what do you think? I'll see you in the next video up here.